Next we got Gus Calderon from another local. He's going to be talking about getting your COA. So Gus, if you can get this put on. I actually met Gus, we were shooting a movie. And we needed some drone footage at the time, and I probably had just, all my students were like, dude, that little Phantom's awesome. Because I had completely just Frankenized it. Because I had video sending unit on it and all kinds of different stuff. We put a gimbal on there. And I just brought it in, and they're all excited. Get it up in the air, let's go check it out. So I'm like, okay. Didn't go through my flight check. Okay, are the props tight? So about 60, 80 feet in, threw a prop, came tumbling down. We're like, we're shooting a movie, we need a drone pilot, who knows, who knows. Gus Calderon came to the rescue and totally got us through. It was one of the 40-hour film festivals.
It was a lot of fun, by the way. I really enjoyed that.
That thing's awesome.
That was great.
Love the shot. We actually had a Vietnam recreation war scene, and it's actually in a field. It's on the corner of the campus, out by Lot 12, and it looks absolutely epic. I should have brought the shot.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, everybody, I'm Gus Calderon, and here to talk to you a little bit about applying for a certificate of waiver and airspace authorization. I apologize in advance. I know this material is a little bit dry. I don't have any cool videos or neat props. I just have words. But I tried to organize these words in a very efficient manner so that you'll be able to go back through this presentation later, and I'm hoping that it'll give you a pretty good overview of the waiver process. I'm going to kind of go through it. First of all, who am I and why am I even qualified to talk about waivers? I've been an FAA licensed commercial pilot for over 22 years. Also, I'm an air carrier certificate holder. So basically, I applied to the FAA to start an air taxi company here in San Diego at the San Diego FSDO. And it was a very, very difficult process, I can assure you, in order to get certified to carry passengers for hire. Vastly more complicated than getting a waiver. But still, I managed to get through the process. I learned a lot working very closely with the FAA for a number of years. I had to write my own operating manuals, maintenance procedures, training manuals. It was absolutely an invaluable experience. I've been flying around for, like I said, years, type-rated in a couple of jets. I've also been a UAS designer, builder, DIY guy for about 10 years, what they call one of the early adopters. I started actually building RC aircraft in the mid-1970s when I was just a kid. Kept through all my teens and 20s, and then always interested in aviation. And when autopilots and basically little small cameras, digital cameras started coming along around 2005, 6, I started putting them on RC aircraft, and that led, to where we are today, basically. Because of my background in these two areas, UAS and commercial aviation, I was actually very fortunate to work for Lady Gaga. A couple of years ago, I don't know if anybody of you saw, but she wanted to fly around stage on her own drone. So I was hired to design the power system and also to fly her because of my experience in aviation. It was a lot of fun. We actually built it here in Carlsbad at the Palomar airport at one of the hangars here. It was a 200-pound multi-rotor, and it was a lot of fun to put that together, and then we shipped it to New York City, and I successfully flew over there at one of her concerts. Great experience, but for you DIY guys, you would have loved it. Our budget was about 10 times your budget, by the way. I wish we still had it, though. It was a lot of fun. I'm also a founder of an aerial imaging company, aerial mapping, whatever you really want to call it, Enviro Skycam. And also, I have a consulting company, and I help people. I'm an UAS industry consultant. I helped about 60 or 70 companies get their exemptions. I wrote a lot of operating manuals as well. And recently I've helped dozens of companies get waivers in a variety of different parts of the industry. This is the aircraft that I own and operate. It's here at Palomar Airport. We used to use this for aerial photography for realtors, brokers, literally like 11, 12 years ago, before any of these drones came along. But it was expensive. And we had quite a few clients, honestly. Christie's, Sotheby's, it was doing pretty well. And then as the technology advanced, the work dried up, obviously, because I knew that too. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I got into putting small cameras and autopilots on RC aircraft was the cost of operating this aircraft. As fun as it is, it's very expensive to fly. Now what's happening, the technology's here, there are so many limitations people are finding, especially for larger projects. We're actually kind of going full circle where I'm now using this aircraft for aerial imaging and mapping. on larger projects, because I do some mapping, small areas like many of you guys do, and about 5-6 months ago, one of my clients called me and said, well, I need you to map an area. I said, well, how big is it? He goes, 25 square miles. I said, okay, that's going to be pretty challenging with the drone. They wanted it for a display. I mean, shadows, changing time of the day, that's not practical. I said, we're going to need an aircraft for that. Anyway, I went out, I met a guy who's an expert who used to work at NASA. Anyway, we modified my aircraft. Now we have 2 camera ports. We have an RGB camera and a near infrared. And we're doing these jobs that are simply too big for the drones. It's very unusual how this all happened, but I'm glad to be a part of it. This is actually an older photo. I love building. I've probably built easily over 100 fixed-wing aircraft, UAS. I did custom building for a while. I still do some payload integration. Sometimes I come across clients who have special sensors. Mark was asking, do I still do any DIY stuff? On occasion, yeah, because as great as some of this stuff is, and it's become very reliable, some people are out there just with new sensors and new technology, and they need to get it on board and fly it around. This is kind of what I've learned over the years, is really you can take a lot of what's in commercial aviation and you can apply it to drone operations. And the main reason you can do that is commercial aviation, they have standardized flight training. They've got standardized maintenance procedures and standardized inspection procedures. We don't have any of this in the drone sector. So you can really apply what's learned, and you can apply the whole techniques to drone operations to improve safety and reliability. The proven techniques in aviation for dozens of years about trend monitoring, decision making, pre-flight procedures that Mark was just talking about, and this will definitely improve the safety of your drone operations. I just put a couple of resources in here. Take your time afterwards. You might want to check out some of these. There's really a lot of good information, even on the FAA website, believe it or not. Okay, getting right into it. What is a certificate of waiver? So a waiver allows a UAS operator to conduct an operation that is currently not permitted under Part 107. So this waiver basically gives you flexibility to the Part 107 regulations, which are honestly quite limiting. The FAA designed the waiver to accommodate new technologies. They understand that this is emerging and changing, and there are also unique operational circumstances that operators will come across. Now, waivers can be granted for up to 4 years. My night waiver, I requested 4 years, and they granted it to me. Often they take more than 90 days to be granted, depending on the complexity and the waiver that you're actually asking for. This is just a list of the actual specific sections that can be waived. Most common in here is daylight operation, what commonly referred to as the night waiver. VLOS, people request. Operations over people, I've submitted those as well. And we're going to talk about authorization to operate in certain airspace as well. These are the most common ones. As I said, I've done the first 2. I'm working on the 3rd one. Apply for a certificate of waiver. It's your responsibility. You have to propose a means by which this operation will be safely conducted. Absolutely critical. You have to provide justification that this operation satisfies certain performance-based standards. And we're going to talk a little bit about performance-based standards in a minute. Now, your request for a certificate of waiver must contain a complete description of the proposed operation. And then, if you're lucky, the FAA may issue the certificate of waiver if they believe that your proposed operation can safely be conducted under the terms, or what they call provisions, of that certificate of waiver. Now, getting back to what is a performance-based standard, this is really important to understand. So the regulations themselves, Part 107, it tells you what the regulations are, but it does not tell you how to comply with them. This is critically important. I told you I have my own air taxi company. When I applied to the FAA to carry passengers, the regulations that we had to follow were Part 135 for unscheduled carriers. What the FAA, I sat down with them and they said to me, what you need to do is you need to take these regulations, every single one of them, line by line, and you need to tell us how you're going to comply with all of these regulations. And you're basically going to write a compliance statement. I thought, I had never heard that term before. We've all heard of operating manuals, but a compliance statement. And they were right. I did that. It took me several months because Part 135 is vastly more complex than Part 107. But I really learned about the regulations, and it was an invaluable experience. So something to think about when you're looking at all these regulations. And another thing you really need to understand when you're looking at these performance-based standards and these regs is you really have to understand hazard identification and risk mitigation. Now, these may be unfamiliar terms to some of you, but you really have to, I wish we had more time, but you're going to need to learn a little bit about this, because you think about it, there are regulations and the FAA says, okay, we're going to give you the option to go beyond those regulations, but you need to tell us how you're going to safely do that. So you have to sit there and think, okay, what are the risks? What can happen? Am I going to possibly run into another aircraft? Am I possibly going to hit a human with my aircraft? What can happen? And what do I need to do to prevent that happening, which is risk mitigation? You want to mitigate or reduce that risk. I firmly believe you really need to have a comprehensive understanding of all the regulations in Part 107. I know many of you have taken the test, but have you really read Part 107? How many guys or ladies in here have truly read Part 107? Okay, excellent, good. If you're going to start going down this road, you really need to take your time and really start to understand it. Now, another thing you can do is the FAA lists all the approved waivers. So you can go in there. Now, it doesn't have what they submitted. You're not going to see their operating manuals or their training manuals, but this will give you some guidance about how, about what you need to submit to the FAA. Another very important thing with the FAA, no matter what it is, only ask for what you need. Do not ask for things you think you might need in the future or make it overly complicated. That would be a huge mistake. Again, you have to fully describe your operations and how you're going to mitigate risks, and how will your operation meet these performance-based standards. Also, do not submit irrelevant information in your application. There's a huge mistake. Some people go online and they find these complex operating manuals and they just submit it to the FAA, but think about it. Somebody's going to be on the other end. They've got stacks and stacks of these applications. They have to go through all this. Are they going to go through your operating manuals? I mean, make it easy for them to read. Just send what they need. If you come close to submitting what the FAA wants, actually we'll probably reach back to you and say, okay, you know what, you got most of it, but we need a little bit more information. They'll do that. They'll definitely do that. Basically, a quick overview of the process. You're going to submit your application to the FAA. They have an online application. I know many of you guys have used this before. And then that application is going to be reviewed by an aviation safety analyst. He's going to make a determination. That determination will be sent to his manager in the FAA. These results will either be approved, which is good, disapproved outright. Usually that'll happen. A number of clients have come to me and they told me they got disapproved, and I asked them what they submitted, supporting documentation. They said, well, nothing. I mean, basically just ask for it. And so that's going to happen. In fact, they're screening out. I think they have somebody screening a lot of these applications because it's happening so common and so often that they want to try and reduce that. Or if you're lucky, somewhere in between, you'll get a request for more information. Hopefully, you'll be able to figure it out and move forward. All right, let's quickly look at an example of a waiver here. So you want to think about what specific regulation you're going to look at, what are the performance-based standards, potential hazards and risks, and how do I prepare a description of my proposed operation? So this is a very common waiver here. Section 107.29, daylight operation. Primarily says no person may operate a small UAS at night, okay? With one minor exemption for civil twilight. So if you go on the FAA's website, they have a PDF, and it lists these 5 performance-based standards. So you need to look at every one of these, and you need to think about how are you going to comply with this? How are you going to meet these standards? So for example, the first one, the applicant must provide a method for the RPIC to maintain visual line of sight. So specifically, how are you going to maintain visual line of sight of your drone at night? Specifically, not we're going to do it, but how are you going to do it? So you need to go through all these, particularly see and avoid other aircraft. They're very concerned about that. People on the ground, ground-based structures and obstacles. How are you going to even know they're there specifically? You also have to provide a method. How will you know the position, altitude, attitude, and movement of your small UAS? Where is it exactly? Not like over there, yeah, we're going to fly it over here. Specifically, how will you know all that? Also, anybody involved in the operation really has to be familiar with conducting night operations, flying at night. There are a lot of visual illusions caused by darkness, and you really need to have a very good understanding of that. FAA wants to make sure that you understand that. When I got my pilot's license to be able to fly at night, to get in my private, we had to do night training and understand all the illusions that can cause confusion in the cockpit. Similar kind of thing right here. You also have to provide a method to increase visibility of your drone so it can be seen at a distance of at least 3 statute miles, right? Unless there's this is kind of an exception here, unless there's a system in place where you can avoid all other aircraft. Okay, how are you going to do that? Let's look at this a little bit more closely. Assuming you go through this, you understand the performance-based standards, you get a granted waiver. So you asked to go beyond the existing regulations, and the FAA looked at everything you submitted and they said, okay, tell you what, we're going to let you go beyond 107. However, we have some new rules for you, and they call those provisions. And there's 2 types of provisions. There's a common provision and a special provision that you're going to see in your granted waiver. And for night waivers, there are 3 special provisions that are very important, and it helps you gain some insight into what they're looking for. So this is on any granted night waiver, which you can go online and see. This is special provision number 9. So the RPIC and VO must be trained to recognize and overcome visual illusions, right, caused by darkness, just like we were talking about, and understand physiological conditions which may degrade night vision. FAA says this training must be documented and must be presented for inspection upon request from the FAA. So clearly, you need some kind of training manual, right? They say that you have to. And you also need to let them know that you're going to be documenting that somebody basically studied this material and then they understand it. So let's take a look at another special provision. The area must be sufficiently illuminated to allow both the RPIC and VO to either identify people and obstacles on the ground, or you have to do a daytime assessment. So hopefully you're starting to think, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to tell the FAA how I'm going to illuminate the area. How big is it? Am I going to use a flashlight? Am I going to use headlights from my car? Do I have other types of lighting? Or am I just, you know what, that's too complicated. I'm just going to do a daytime site assessment. So you need to start thinking about all these things and put them together in your application. Okay, there's one other special provision in the night waivers, pretty important. They say that your UAS must be equipped with a lighted anti-collision light visible from no less than 3 statute miles. Okay, sounds simple, right? How do you know it's visible from 3 statute miles? Are you going to measure out, are you going to go at night, are you going to measure out 3 miles with somebody you can confirm that it's still visible? Or maybe you could find a manufacturer that has actually tested it and confirmed that it's visible from 3 statute miles. I don't know. But the applicant, you guys, would need to figure that out. FAA also says, which is very wise, if that light is too bright, you can turn it down. But they want to make sure that you have it so other aircraft can see it at night. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about airspace authorization. It's a similar process. You go through the same site on the website, but this is it's a much simpler process. And here you're just asking for authorization to fly in controlled airspace. And these are usually granted for up to 6 months. And they're limited to small operational areas. I know some of you guys have these, so you can call them COAs or airspace authorizations. So small operational areas within controlled airspace. And they're usually processed in less than 90 days. However, one of my clients is here, JP, will tell you that that is not true. It can definitely take longer than that. Specifically, 10741 says no one may operate a small UAS in Class B, C, D, or within the lateral boundaries of E, unless that person has prior authorization from ATC. By the way, Class E airspace, everybody's familiar with that, right? Some people are. Examples, anybody know some Class E airspace? Okay, so I see some heads shaking up there. Class B airspace is around the busiest airports, for example, San Diego, Los Angeles. Class C is a little bit less busy. There's a number of Class C, Burbank. Class D is even less busy than that, like Palomar Airport is Class D. Now Class E, those are kind of approach corridors to often Class D airspace. And actually, if you look on a map, this campus is actually underneath Class E airspace. So if somebody wants to fly a 107 operation, technically by the book, they would actually need an airspace authorization to fly on this campus, something to keep in mind. I know there's exemptions for educational and other types of operations. If you're going to apply for an airspace authorization, request a low altitude always. Also, stay as far away from the airport as possible. You're probably not going to get approved if you're within 1 nautical mile of the airport center point. So try and stay as far away from the center of the airport as possible. Consider risk mitigations when you're operating close to other aircraft. Very important. The FAA wants to know that you're not going to cause any hazards with other aircraft. In your application, you need to be very clear about latitude and longitude. They want to know exactly where you're going to be flying. They are not going to approve this unless you're very, very clear and specific about where you're going to be flying, because they have to communicate that information to other operators and other pilots. Also, pick a small operating area if you can. It definitely will be easier to approve. I just put some waiver resources up here. It's a pretty good little list. This will definitely get you started, cover a lot of what I discussed in this presentation. Takeaway: before asking for an exception to the rules, be certain you have a complete understanding of the existing regulations. You should research all granted waivers, performance-based standards, and all the relevant material you can find online. You really need to develop an understanding of hazard identification, risk mitigation, and operational procedures. And when in doubt, ask an expert for guidance or assistance. And that wraps it up. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, I think I have a minute or two for questions.
On the flying over people,
Yes.
if you're a fixed-wing pilot, you
Yes.
know distances and altitudes. This makes me think that I have to ask for a waiver just for about anything.
If they're in a vehicle, so there are exceptions in Part 107, then you don't need it. But they're mainly talking about like at a concert venue or something like that. It's also a little bit different if they're involved in the operation, actually involved in the operation itself, then it's okay. But if not, that's when you're going to need a waiver. So going beyond that. But most of the operations over people that I've had to do are for concert-related events with other people. And they're pretty cautious about handing those out because of the safety risks. So
what would the wisdom be to try and get an authorization for an area that's desirable real estate? And shoot some videos there, like say, post on the action. You want to keep the information request narrow, but you want to have that available in case that last minute real estate agent says, hey, I need a shot.
right.
What do you do there?
A lot of my clients actually ask for airspace around some of the busiest, and they just keep resubmitting them.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely. Very, very common. Yeah, because a lot of these guys go all over. This takes a while to get approved. You know how jobs come up. I mean, a lot of operators, they get a job, they have to go flying the next day. You can't get an authorization of the waiver the next day. So you want to do it in advance. And it's free to do. So.
Could you scoot back in your slides where you have the last ranks?
Oh, Waiver Resources? Yeah. And I believe you should be able to get all this afterwards. That's what I was told, so in case you need it.
So, I think one of the books you said studied previously granted waivers.
Yes.
Is that public?
Yes, yes. The granted waivers are, right? So not the application, right? So that's where the special provisions are, and it's only a few pages. But it will give you some insight as to what the FAA is looking for.
If it's possible to work pursuing that.
Definitely, yeah. Go ahead. Oh,
Can you get an extension, or do you have to keep submitting it?
it's my understanding you'd need to resubmit, yeah. Probably before your deadline comes up so they have time.
Do they tell you the reason for disapproval?
No, you're just disapproved, no.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know. So I get a lot of those calls. I was, yeah. Excellent. Oh, go ahead, in the back.
Let's say I am doing some video work and I need a drone, somebody to fly a drone, and it's right next to a Class D airport,
Okay,
like Palomar.
yes, okay.
Can I apply for the waiver and just use different drone operators who have a pilot license in the 6 months it's granted for? Or does it have to be one specific person flying the drone, or do they actually have to apply for it?
Well, the responsible person, FAA likes to use, can apply, but that's only if it's if these people work for you. If you have an operation, then you can do it. But if,
They're all like, I'm freelance for Legoland, they're freelance for me, like it's.
yeah, they would need to do it on their own to submit. Yeah, submit their own request. Yeah, absolutely. Sir?
In your experience, what are the penalties for not complying with these?
I don't even want to know. It's completely up to the FAA. They have very strong enforcement capabilities. I mean, up to several $100,000 fine or imprisonment. It depends. It's probably going to depend on the outcome. If somebody's just reporting you, it could be just a letter. If there's an incident, obviously if an aircraft is impacted, it could be, prison.
In your experience, have you seen them used as enforcement capability, I guess.
This is a pretty new process, so I've seen enforcement under the exemption. And I've seen when people are flying recklessly, yeah, there have definitely been enforcement actions against reckless operators, which they have the authorization to do that. Go
So
ahead.
as certified operators, what's our responsibility if we see something, who do we report it to, how do we go about reporting it?
It's really best to,
Right?
yeah, I know. I mean, technically you're supposed to contact the FAA or at least go to the operator. Sometimes, a lot of times the operator is just not aware that they're flying in an area that's near an airport. I come across that all the time, or they'll just be flying over people and they're just not aware. So the more we know about, the regulations and what's safe, the better stewards we can be of this technology, because there are just a lot of young kids who are getting these drones that are so incredibly affordable now, and literally they're not doing anything wrong or malevolent, they just don't know. I see it all the time when I'm out there.
July was a good example.
Yeah, and it happens all the time, or when there are fires and the firefighters are trying to go and they can't launch because kids are flying their drones. So you just need to get out there and talk to people as much as possible and set good examples.
They do have a way to contact the FAA and report someone
If you want to.
online
Yeah, there's a way to do that, absolutely.
for a problem, not for any kids.
Right, not below 18. Excellent. Anybody else?
We'll have
We're done?
on,
All right.
Unfortunately, so maybe
Okay.
one more question.
Any more questions? Wait, one more.
Is there a difference between a COW and a COA?
Yeah, COW is Certificate of Waiver, COA is Certificate of Authorization.
But you talk
So-
about a certificate of waiver for authorization.
Oh, for airspace, because for airspace you can get a waiver, which is more involved because that's going to last a longer period of time, where the authorization is short in time. So for 10741 is the one example where you can get an authorization or a waiver, but it's much more complicated to get a waiver because it lasts longer.
Is there a
fact,
way
I've
to
never even-
employ a designated operating zone that's, say, in a Class Delta airspace?
I've never honestly even tried for a waiver, for an airspace waiver. I've talked to a couple guys about that, and I haven't heard of them being handed out very easily. So most people are just going the route of the authorization. A lot simpler. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.